Thank you so much, Rachel. It is absolutely thrilling to be here. And I have to tell you that when I got off the plane, of course, the first thing I did was went for a walk up Queen Street. And I popped in this little store, and there was a map. And on this map, they had, in fact, flipped the world around. And so instead of being on the bottom of the globe, New Zealand and Australia were on the top of the globe. And I have to tell you that I stared at this map for a very long time because it was really discombobulating to see the world flip the other way. And of course, we all know the Earth is round and there's no top and there's no bottom. But of course, this idea that I'm not at the bottom of the world, but as I stand in front of you at the top of the world is a very powerful one. So it's thrilling to be here in New Zealand with you at the top of the world. I'm going to have to buy that map and take it home for my kids to give them a little bit of perspective. I'm going to talk to you today about Toronto. And I'm going to talk to you about Toronto because there are things that are happening in Toronto that might have something to say of relevance to what's happening here in Auckland. And I say this in part because the comments from your mayor as an introduction made it abundantly clear that there are a tremendous number of similarities. The way we're changing, the way we're growing, in fact, are very similar. So what I'd like to do, trusting that my slides will appear, is begin by telling you a little bit about some of the transformation that's happening in the city of Toronto. Of course, it's always a good thing to talk about what you know, and so I am going to focus on the transformations that we see in our city as they might be relevant in order to provide some fodder for the conversation that I'm going to have with Ludo after the presentation. Are the slides coming up there? There we go. Very much like Auckland, one of the things that we've learned in Toronto over the course of the past decade is that we're popular. We're in fact doing some things right. I hear that you're growing by 50,000 people on an annual basis. We're actually growing by 100,000 people on an annual basis, and all the constraints that come along with that. As we grow and change, one of the things we're committed to doing is becoming something fundamentally different than what we were. Our goal as we grow is to become more livable, to become more sustainable, to use the growth and the opportunities that we see that come with growth to become a fundamentally transformed place. This is a slide of our city. Our city, like yours, is an amalgamated region. 15 years ago, we were 7 cities. Now we're 1 city. This area is 613 square kilometers, to give you a sense of scale. And right in the very center, there's 17 square kilometers that are, in fact, the most urban part of the city, the downtown core. And that part of the city is growing 4 times faster than the rest of the city. And this is important because what we've seen is that it's the most urban part of the city that is, in fact, as a result of the transition that we've been going through, becoming the most attractive part of the city to transform. Now, of course, downtowns are in vogue all across North America, and you could argue across the world, but in fact, none have grown at the same scale that we're growing in downtown Toronto. And you can just imagine all the infrastructure problems, because you're facing some of them here, that come with this rapid growth. So whereas currently there's approximately 250,000 people living in the downtown, we're projecting that in another 20 years' time, there'll be 475,000 people living just in that 17 square kilometers within the context of a 600 square kilometer city. So one of our challenges is how we spread the growth out, and I'll talk a little bit about that. In addition, this is our employment hub. 51% of the national GDP is actually generated in this 17 square kilometers, and over 500,000 jobs are also in this core, projected to be 750,000 jobs within another 20-year period. So we're packing a tremendous amount of intensity into this core. Now, this is as a result of an intentional shift. This is an outcome of planning policy. This is a result of trying to do things differently, to become something different from that very suburban typology that exists across the city. So you can see in the bottom bar here, the City of Toronto's overall growth. Now you can see in the second bar, downtown's growth. And you see that in the last decade, we've been attracting the growth into our most urban areas. Now, the third bar at the top of the screen is the most suburban part of our region, and you can see an enormous decline in that suburban growth. And I'll tell you why that is in a minute. But there's a fundamental question that every city must confront. You cannot grow out and grow up and offer a high quality of life. If you're going to be adding more people and you're going to be adding more cars, your environmental footprint will only get larger. Your quality of life will only decline as the long commute becomes a part of everyday life. So driving growth into existing built-up areas is about livability. It's also about affordability because it's pretty expensive to drive everywhere as opposed to walking and cycling. So this is a critical question that cities must struggle with. And one of the transformations that has taken place over the past 15 years in Toronto is that we are now primarily building multiples, higher density housing. We're building very little suburban sprawl. That's why we see that shift on that graph. Almost 90% of the new housing in 2016, 90% was multiples, condos and apartments, as opposed to single family homes. This is about reducing our congestion. This is about becoming a more sustainable city. This is about long-term livability and affordability, embracing a new kind of built form that creates an opportunity to live with a smaller environmental footprint and a stronger sense of community. So our skyline is changing. It's becoming denser. This is what the downtown looked like just 10 years ago. And this is what it looks like today. This is the transformation, and I'll go back so you can see that again, in just one decade. And in the next decade, this transformation is going to happen again. And the question becomes, as we become denser, can our quality of life go up? Can affordability go up? And it can if we get the big moves and the smaller moves right. We have a tremendous way to go to get there. And one of the hottest topics of conversation in Toronto is our infrastructure deficit, the quality and character of our public spaces, affordability, traffic congestion, and investing in transit. So we know we are only part way along on this journey, but I'm going to show you some of the things that we're doing to try to shift our course to become a more sustainable, livable, and affordable city. Now, this is our downtown core. Our peak density isn't too bad. We're at approximately 17,000 people per square kilometer, but our average density in the city is very low. And this is a reflection of the fact that we're a spiky city. Very high density in the core of the city, and then very low density in our suburbs. So a clue to what needs to change is actually transforming our suburbs. We are focusing on that missing middle. How do we, in fact, add mid-rise density to bridge that gap between the spiky, really high density parts of the city and the lower density parts of the city? And to put this in perspective, our peak density is about the same as London, England. But the average density in London is much higher because it's not a spiky city like we are. And then, of course, New York is way off the map. We're at 17,000 people per square kilometer. New York's peak density is 58,000 people per square kilometers. We don't actually aspire to that. That's not our objective. But the average density is approximately 10,000 people per square kilometers, which is actually a very reasonable amount of density. And remember, there's all kinds of great benefits that come with this level of density, including the opportunity to do a whole variety of things within walking distance of home. You only get that from density, having that critical mass that allows people to live in relatively small communities, but also to have a really sophisticated transit network that allows you to get anywhere to anywhere on transit that only exists when you start getting these higher densities, because otherwise you just can't get the frequency of service, or you can't get the price to provide that frequency of service that makes transit a true option. So when we're looking at intensifying our city, We're driving our growth to our main transit corridors, and I'll show you a little bit about what that looks like. So we see ourselves at a moment where we have a real massive convergence taking place at the highest policy level and at the detailed precinct planning level that is allowing us to turn the city into something better, to make it something different from what it has been in the past. And we have to start at the highest level. We have been, for the past 30 years, sprawling outwards. 10 years ago, our provincial government brought in our Green Belt Plan. This is 1 million hectares of land that has been protected as agricultural land. We copied on a big scale what Portland, Oregon did 40 years ago on a small scale. We put a green belt in place. And the objective of the green belt was to shift land economics in such a way that we are now driving growth into our existing built-up areas. This is really important. You do not get intensification on a significant scale unless you limit what's happening on the edges of the city. You can't grow out and up at the same time. You can't suck and blow. And this policy framework is about saying, hold on a minute. We're going to shift the way growth happens in our region. We're going to drive those growth to those areas where we already have infrastructure. And we're going to do this precisely because we want to become a transit-oriented region. We want to get those densities to a point where transit becomes the viable alternative. So this high-level policy framework is really the key starting point that allows everything else you're going to see in this presentation become a reality. But we also know that young people have a very different desire in terms of their consumer preference for how they want to live in urban places. And cities that aren't attracting young people, of course, are going to eventually go into decline. So we recognize catering to young people in transforming how we change as a city as being essential. We know that young people, they want to walk to work. We know that they want to move by bike. We know that they're no longer getting their driver's licenses when they turn 16 if they have that choice. So we're trying to change the city to increase the choices for walking, cycling, and living very close to where you work. And if we look at that downtown core that is seeing the bulk of our growth, a fascinating thing has happened. 75% of the population walks or cycles to work in the downtown. This is fabulous from a sustainability perspective, but also from a quality of life and an affordability perspective, because these young people do not need to own a car. They do not need to pay for parking. They do not need insurance. They do not need gas. They pay a little bit more for a smaller space in the core as a trade-off for a higher quality of life and a more sustainable way of living. But we've also discovered that across the city as a whole, even in our suburban areas, that people want complete communities. They want the option to do a variety of things within walking distance of home. Pembina Institute is an organization that conducts research in Canada, and they put out a survey and they asked, would you be willing to trade off a smaller home with a smaller yard in exchange for being within walking distance to shopping, the doctor, the dentist, transit, and or a larger yard, a larger home, but you don't have those amenities within walking distance at a lower price point. 86% in fact chose walking. This is really important data that gives us an input into focusing on creating those complete communities by transforming our traditional suburbs. So this is our urban structure plan, and this is a really important part of the narrative that is driving the transformation that you're going to see in the upcoming slides. The downtown core is the mustard yellow piece that you see. The linear areas that are shown as brown are our avenues. Those are areas where we are adding mid-rise development as a way of increasing the mix of uses and the density in the traditional car-oriented suburbs, but they also correspond to our rapid transit corridors. So we are directing our growth to our main transit corridors because as we grow, we don't want to add cars. We simply do not have the road capacity to add more cars. In fact, we want to take away capacity for cars and add it for pedestrians and cyclists. And this is a critical part of our vision of becoming a more livable, sustainable, and affordable city. So this is a little bit what that looks like. This is along a highway and a subway corridor. It's about adding green sidewalks. This is right in the heart of our suburbs in our city. We are adding mid-rise development. This project is under development today. It's about adding a critical mass of housing around our main transit corridors in a green environment that is pedestrian-oriented, that gives people the choice of living without a car. We recognize that affordability isn't an outcome of great urbanism, although it is necessary to it. And this is a really important point, because the world over, we face a great risk that as we create great cities, they increasingly become more and more exclusive. They become playgrounds for the rich. This is happening in my city. We're seeing global capital from all over the world landing in our city. And this is driving up housing prices and creating a risk that people who live and work in the city cannot afford housing in the city. There's only one way, in my experience, to address this, and it's by having intentional policy that seeks to create a city for all. It's about being explicit at the outset that our cities will be places not just for tourists, but will be places where people can live and work, and in particular, raise a family. And in the next slide, as I walk through some examples of changes that we've made, I'll talk about what some of those intentional policy mechanisms are. Because just investing in public space will not make your city inclusive. Investing in great transit will in fact drive housing prices up. It will make your city more exclusive. If that's not the goal, then thinking about affordability and policy measures to drive affordability is critical. Now, let me be clear, we have not solved this in Toronto, but there's a variety of things that we're doing to ensure that we're adding affordable housing, and we're seeking to become more and more aggressive as we do that. The first key move that we're making is urbanizing our avenues, and this is about embracing the mid-rise city. So going back to that map, it's those brown areas on this map, those linear corridors when we can add linear neighborhoods that we are currently transforming. This is the built form typology. We have mid-rise guidelines to drive this typology. Our goal is to create great pedestrian environments. So we don't want these buildings to be too tall, because we need sunlight on the sidewalks. We need Main Street retail so that they function as part of an existing neighborhood. These are all projects that are either built or currently under construction in the city. This is an example of that mid-rise typology being added right in the heart of our suburbs. But it can take a lot of different forms. This is another example of gentle intensification. You can see that the taller forms have been pushed into the center of the block. And this is another example, and this is one of my favorite examples because it conforms directly to our mid-rise guidelines. You can see the higher stories step back. That is to ensure that we maintain the sunlight on the sidewalk. But what you can also see in this slide, that this is a new building in a built form that is in a state of transformation. Look at the buildings to the east and the buildings to the west. They have yet to transform to adopt this mid-rise typology. This is about adding a new form in an environment where it doesn't yet exist. And this is another great slide that shows the city in a state of evolution. Adding more housing density. This is a streetcar corridor in the city. Now, this is a suburban corridor, which I like to call Anywhere USA, although it's Anywhere Toronto, because these wide arterial roads, I suspect you've got a few of them here in Auckland as well, that in fact are faced with a tremendous amount of surface parking. They too can become something fundamentally different. So the example here I'm going to show you is a corridor that is 22 kilometers long, running right through the heart of the city. Not all of it looks like this typology, which is very suburban, and some of it is more urban. But the big move on this corridor is to add LRT. So we are currently building out 22 kilometers of LRT right through the heart of the city. But we're also transforming the street. adding cycling lanes, widened sidewalks, and green infrastructure along the streetscape, and then also adding a mid-rise typology along the corridor. Now, this is the suburbs. This is about transforming the suburbs to become walkable, linear neighborhoods with new levels of density. Remember that slide that I showed you of the Greenbelt plan? This isn't possible without the Greenbelt plan. The Greenbelt policy framework directs growth into our existing areas. In the absence of the plan, there's no incentive to not do the easy thing, because the easy thing is to keep sprawling outward, to continue building suburbs and greenfields. This is actually a little bit trickier and involves public investment like LRT. But because of that larger policy framework, we can deliver on this new vision. And this is the same typology, but where the LRT is below grade. It's below grade for 11 kilometers. This is that same area. This is the built form framework that has been approved by City Council, and the streetscape is currently under construction today. It's a far cry from that highway typology that it is today. And this is how we are seeking to become a more livable city. Now, this is that entire corridor right through the heart of the city. The public investment is the LRT, the new streetscape, the new sidewalks, the cycling infrastructure. It has been followed by an astronomical level of private investment. 17,000 residential units are proposed along this corridor. And you know what's so powerful? Many of those projects will have their parking requirements forgiven. No parking. Because the people who live along this corridor will not need to own a car. So we're adding population density without adding more cars. We're adding population density in the places where we can provide transportation choice. Because of the density in the linear neighborhoods and the mix of uses, you can walk to work, you can walk to the doctor, you can walk to the dentist, you can walk to do your grocery shopping, or you can take a cycling lane, or you can connect into the broader city's transit network on LRT. This is the opportunity of creating places that are fundamentally different from how they looked in the past. This is another example, Dufferin Avenue. You can see here that there's many strip malls. This too is right in the heart of our suburbs. And you can see here, what I like about this slide is you can see how it's right up against single-family homes. To the bottom side of those slides, those are all single-family homes. Currently, if you live in one of those homes, you get in your car to do everything because you must. You really don't have a lot of choices. But urbanizing the avenue is about providing choice within walking distance of home and adding new housing typologies along the corridor. That strip malls, those parking lots are being transformed into this, a new amenity in the suburbs. We're urbanizing our suburbs to make them more sustainable places. The second key way that we're responding to this mandate of creating a livable and affordable city is by urbanizing our classic suburbs by adding gentle density and new housing types. This is a typical 1950s strip mall. This is a picture from when it was originally built. This is what it looks like today. This is right in the heart of one of our most beautiful suburbs in Etobicoke. Very high-end housing. And here too, you pretty much have to drive everywhere, including if you want to go to this mall. There's no pedestrian connections to the adjacent suburbs. So we are transforming this into a hub right in the heart of the suburbs. The idea being that there will be choice in terms of how you can move, the destinations that you can walk to. So this is what this new community will look like. It will include affordable housing, seniors housing. There's still parking here, but the parking has been put underground. All of the new buildings conform to our green roof bylaw, where we require green roofs. And there's a whole variety of new housing types that have been added here. Now, I have a personal story that I'll tell you, which is my husband actually grew up in this classic suburb. And 4 siblings, his parents had a pretty big house, and when the kids moved out of the house, they had this great big house. They loved their neighborhood. They didn't want to move out of their neighborhood, but there was one pretty simple problem. There wasn't anywhere to move in the neighborhood. And I like to tell them that this project is for them. Unfortunately, it came too 10 years too late. They could have stayed in their neighborhood if this has been built, because urbanizing your classic suburbs is about adding choice that can respond to people at all ages of their lifespan. So young people can live here, but people who are downsizing can live here too. Now, my in-laws would never move into the downtown core of the city. That's too urban for them. But to stay in a classic suburbs, in a different housing typology, now that would have been a real choice. And we failed in terms of our public policy because we didn't have this choice. And now we are going to have this choice by urbanizing our classic suburbs. And this is a little bit of what some of the amenity will look like in that new area. The third way that we're responding to livability is about detailed precinct planning, ensuring that the promise materializes. It's one thing to say that we're going to densify the city, and then it's another to actually get the mix of uses right in such a way that this is a really high quality of life. In fact, for many people, one of the reasons why they don't actually like density is because there's so many high density projects in our cities that are not well done. The design detail compromises walkability, sustainability, and quality of life. So on a brownfield site in our downtown core, very close to our waterfront, we have a precinct called the West Don Lands. And for 30 years, almost my whole life, this has just been a brownfield with some old neglected heritage buildings. Well, we've protected those heritage buildings, and we've created a precinct plan. And as a result of hosting the Pan Am Games in 2015, we fast-tracked the building out of this neighborhood. Now, what's important about this neighborhood is it's about a 10-minute walk to the downtown. We've required that 20% of all the units are affordable units. We've also added student housing. We've added university uses. We've added housing for our First Nations communities and servicing for our First Nations community. But we've also added market housing. So this is a true, complete, mixed-use community with a really high-quality public realm that becomes really the hook that all of these different uses hang on. This is in fact what it looks like today. You can see there's a couple more parcels that are now under construction, and there's 2 more parcels that have just been released by the province for 720 new affordable housing units. Leveraging provincially owned lands and precincts where we've done our master planning for affordable housing, requiring 20% affordable housing is a key way that we're delivering on our mandate for new affordable precincts. And this is what the street level condition looks like. This is what the quality of the public realm looks like. This is a little bit different from the old model 20, 30 years ago, where we created clusters of affordable housing and we didn't mix it with market housing, and where we didn't focus on a really high quality public realm. The objective here is to ensure that the high quality public realm actually creates gathering places for social interaction in the community. But we're also really preoccupied with ensuring that families can live in these dense urban places. We've just completed a study called Growing Up Vertical, which is all about raising families in high-rise and mid-rise communities. We worked with architects, interior designers, and we focused on really 3 scales: getting the unit design right, the building right, but also the neighborhood right. So this precinct has one of the best children's parks in the city. Why? Because we want to make living in vertical communities a first choice for families. We don't want to force families into environments where they have to have a long commute that compromises family life. We want families, we want parents to have the opportunity to drop children off in the daycare in their building and then to walk 5 or 10 minutes to work, so that they can walk back to the daycare if they've got a sick kid, or they can walk home at lunchtime to visit their child and then walk back to work. This is the dream that we can offer in vertical communities. Today, many families get pushed way out into the suburbs to find housing that's affordable, and they end up compromising time with their family. Why? Because they're sitting in a car for 45 minutes each way. We're stealing their time from their children. And this is why we created our Growing Up Vertical policies. It's about ensuring that affordable housing in the core of the city that offers excellent quality of life for families is what we are delivering on. We're also focusing on strategic, site-specific infill. Now, I don't even know if this is a challenge in New Zealand, but in the 50s in Toronto, we did build some higher density housing in our suburbs. And it's Tower in the Park. The assumption was that people would drive everywhere. This housing very quickly became very poor quality housing. In fact, this housing is frequently where many immigrants will go because the housing is cheap. And it's cheap because it's disconnected from any kind of amenity or urban vibrancy, and it's also typically disconnected from transit. So we're thinking very carefully about how we can add transit, but also transform this housing into being a high quality form of housing. There's over 2,000 of these apartment towers in the Toronto region, home to over 1 million people. And this is affordable housing in Toronto. So the question becomes, how do we ensure this is high quality housing? We have a dream that every immigrant coming into our city within one generation is a part of the middle class. We don't really have a significant problem with multi-generational poverty that you see in some countries that are also high receptacles for immigrants. About 50% of Torontonians are foreign born. And within one generation, most of those immigrant families actually have a university education and are absorbed into the professional class. That is a critical part of our democracy and of the Canadian dream. But improving this housing and ensuring that we make it easier to integrate into Canadian society through access to libraries, access to transit, that provides access to jobs and education, is one of the key challenges that we're trying to solve. So I'll give you an example. It's called Parkway Forest. Think of the most suburban suburbia you possibly can. Highway interchanges, big malls, low density. That's Parkway Forest. You can see here the ground floor before and after for those who are urban designers in the room. Buildings that were floating in the middle of the site, unowned park spaces that were dangerous and unused, were transformed by bringing the buildings up to the street, creating a street wall, infilling strategically. This is what that looks like. We added new mid-rise buildings in order to create a street edge, to create a pedestrian realm, to make these communities walkable communities that connected into a new subway station. Also adding buildings that allowed for a mixture of uses. These buildings at the edge of the street can have not-for-profit agencies, grocery stores, a whole variety of amenities that didn't exist within walking distance before. You had to own a car if you lived in this suburban environment. And this is what the infill looks like. Keeping the existing affordable rental housing, adding new housing that can create a clear and legible pedestrian realm. Now, we wanted to figure out a way to draw pedestrians into the site, and so we created a public art installation. These are beacons by Douglas Coupland, the writer of Generation X. He does a lot of public art competitions in the city of Toronto, and the beacons create a legible pedestrian realm within the heart of this new community. And they start at the transit corner and they lead and terminate at a new school, a new community center, and a new pool. This was all about creating spaces where pedestrians belonged in an area where previously it wasn't clear that pedestrians belonged, and quite frankly, people didn't walk because it was dangerous. So new streets with buildings with eyes on the street, new housing forms, so adding market housing where there had only been rental housing before, and also making it very clear that there is a high quality pedestrian realm and what the pedestrian realm is before. Whereas before there were just a lot of grassy knolls that no one used, but also focusing on those amenities for children and new buildings. The building that you see in the background is a new building. The building on the right is an existing apartment building. New buildings with market housing adjacent to affordable housing. Affordable housing, I think, is what you would call state housing here. And we used a policy mechanism, which we call Section 37. The developer was required, in exchange for this new density, to give us monies as a city that were then used to revitalize the existing state housing or the existing affordable housing. So in this project, housing that had previously been in a state of disrepair, in fact, became revitalized as well. It's a win-win-win. And of course, a new community center that everyone could share. Both those living in affordable and those living in market housing can come together in this new community facility. Another example of a large-scale revitalization, hundreds and hundreds of acres right in the heart of the city. This too, state housing that was highly problematic, no street grid, orphaned public spaces, no mixed uses. It was very difficult for people to buy groceries who lived in this community, even though it was in the heart of downtown Toronto. We've fundamentally transformed this area by adding new street blocks and adding new uses. This is what it looked like before. This is the exact same corner I'm about to show you. This is what it looks like today. This is on a streetcar line. Now there's a grocery store. There is a mixture of affordable or state as well as social housing as well as market housing. Mixing up these uses to provide new affordable housing and to provide amenity and a mixed use community. And here's an example of what the first phase looks like that you can see a little bit to the left of the screen. The third phase is at the top of the screen, which hasn't changed yet, and you can see that there's a mixture of building typologies, adding in a high-quality public realm. The area to the south is now a massive park and community center that's already been built out. But creating a legible pedestrian realm, making it very clear that people are welcome and belong in this community, spaces where people can engage with one another, is a key part of the vision of creating these new mixed-use, high-density communities. Investing in our public realm, creating quality public space for public life. The Bentway is a project right in the heart of our downtown, whereby we've taken a super highway structure, which we, for many generations, had a massive fight in the city about whether it should stay up or whether it should come down. Under the many generations of city council, in order to appease suburban voters, it has in fact continued to stay up, and in the end we've decided to work with it. You can see here new communities in the heart of downtown. All of these communities, you can see the population density that's been added. This is within about a 10 square kilometer area. And right in the heart, dividing this community, is this expressway. And so the question became, how do we provide a new amenity for the community and link these neighborhoods together, providing linear access to the core of the city? And the core of the city is right where you see the Sky Dome on the right side of the screen. So this is what that highway infrastructure looks like. We've built up the neighborhoods right adjacent to this highway infrastructure, which is very well used. We're turning it into a dynamic new public space. We've created a new community trust, and it will be a multi-season programmed space that also acts as a linear parkway. What we're trying to do here is take some of the mistakes of the past and actually manipulate them and transform them to become something good, to link together areas of the city that are divided by using this infrastructure in new ways. And we've kind of called these orphaned spaces that we're transforming to link together and connect the city. And this is what the space will look like in the winter. And this space was initiated by a $25 million private sector donation that was matched by a $10 million donation by the city, and it will be open within 6 months' time. We're also investing in waterfront parks, as you are, thinking very carefully about the amenity of the waterfront as being something fundamentally new in the city as we transition from an industrial waterfront to a complete mixed community. We've kept some of our industrial uses. That's a sugar refinery that you see with a blue roof. The area that you see in the foreground is now Sugar Beach. This is what Sugar Beach looks like. One of the things that we've celebrated is the bumping up of the industrial uses with the public amenities and the public uses. We've also added in new office uses, new residential uses. We're transforming the waterfront to become a dynamic public space. This is our wave deck park, and the wave deck is about extending out the public realm to cantilever over the piers to add public space in areas where pedestrians currently get squeezed. This is Wave Deck Park. We're also thinking about using infrastructure in a multitude of ways. The old model was really about public art being public art, infrastructure being infrastructure. This is an example of public art that's also a park, that's also a stormwater management feature. It's extra hard working infrastructure, and we're leading with investment in the public realm, much like you are here in your downtown quarter, investing public dollars to attract private investment. Now, the hook all of this planning hangs on is really our transit network plan. And we've brought forward, I have the great pleasure as chief planner of also being responsible for transit planning in the city. We link together intensification and growth with our transit planning. We see those two things as inseparable. If we want to add people but we don't want to add cars, we have to add the density to where transit is or where we're putting transit. And this isn't just about one transit line, it's about a transit network. Just like you create a network for vehicles, transit riders should be able to get anywhere to anywhere in the city on transit using one transfer. We call it the one transfer trip. The idea that you can travel in an L anywhere in the city if you have a network. So what you see here on the screen is the rapid transit network. We are adding a whole variety of different technologies. We're building subways and planning two new subways. We're building 22 kilometers of LRT, but we also have 4 more LRT projects: Waterfront LRT, Eglinton East, Eglinton West. Finch LRT is LRT in our suburbs. We're also adding BRT. We've really taken an approach that we have to look at the typology, the growth in the city, and add the right technology in the right place in order to create a seamless system where people can move from one technology to the next to use transit as their first choice. Transit is really the hook that this entire vision hangs upon. And the last few slides I'd like to mention to you is about the way we're doing this. We know it's important to transform the way we think about the city. We actually say in our city policy that we need to change our minds. If we're going to change the city, we need to change our minds. We need to think differently about the city. We say in our policy framework that our goal is to move people, not cars. That's a big new way of thinking in our city, which is primarily suburban. So we've embraced a whole variety of mechanisms to transform the discourse in order to transform the city. We have a whole initiative called Growing Conversations, which might be a bit like your Auckland conversations. I hold chief planner roundtables, which are about asking the questions we don't know the answer to and bringing voices into City Hall that don't usually have access to City Hall. And then we broadcast those conversations, and we use those conversations to generate action plans. We also have something called PIPs, Planners in Public Space. Planners go into public space to talk to the city residents about the future of the city. We go to the places where residents already are. We have a planning review panel. We have selected 28 residents through a civic lottery to be our sounding board. This panel is representative of the incomes in the city, the ownership in the city. It's 50% owners, 50% renters. Believe it or not, they have different things to say. It's representative of the ages of the city. There's lots of young people on here because we've got lots of young people in our city. It's representative of the ethnic diversity of our city. There are hundreds and hundreds of languages spoken in Toronto. This sounding board provides us with advice on our policies that we bring forward to City Council in order to ensure that we are sensitized as planners to the diverse voices, experience, and perspectives that exist in our city. We've also created a youth research team, and the youth research team are youth talking to youth, advising us on how to transform the city. And they've given us many, many recommendations which we're implementing. As an example, I created a podcast called Invisible City Podcast. It's about cities. It's about the things that you don't see that transform and can be transformative in cities. Why? Because youth said to us, you know what? We don't see the relevance of city planning. But we listen to podcasts. If you made a cool podcast, you might be able to get us hooked in. And the podcast has been hugely popular amongst people under the age of 40. A few older people too, I think. We recognize in our city that affordability is a choice and that affordability and livability are inherently and fundamentally conjoined. The risk is that our cities get better but only for some. They get better, but in an exclusive way. If we're truly committed to the democratic project, if we're truly committed to being an inclusive city, we will in fact choose to create cities that are affordable and livable for all, because after all, it really is a choice. Thank you.